Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you and for your interest in coming to this session. I know if I were having to choose, I would have a very hard time when there's so much good content going on at the same time, but thank you for choosing this presentation. I am going to be speaking about the issue of objectification and how I think that is central to the issues that we're dealing with when we talk about sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. And because we're already a little running behind, we're pressed for time, so I'm just going to jump right in. Just very briefly giving you an outline of what I'll be speaking about. I'm going to make some introductory comments that just help frame the conversation that we'll be getting into the particulars about objectification. And then I will address what I mean by that term and why I think it's important to the issues of sexual abuse and exploitation. We're going to talk about, again, about what it means to be a person, about the objectification theory that exists out there, and we're going to go over some research about the harms of objectification. So that's the goals of this presentation, and also I want to be sure to share with you some closing thoughts and ideas about how we can confront and push back against sexual objectification. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I know that we come here for different reasons. We all have different reasons about why we've come to an event like this to talk about the issue of pornography. Some of it might be from personal experience, struggling with pornography use. Maybe it's your family has been impacted in some negative way. Maybe pornography was part of a sexual abuse experience in your life. So I think there's different reasons that we might all be in this room. But I think we are united, though, in a larger purpose in which we're seeking a world free from sexual abuse and exploitation. And that's certainly what the organization that I work for is about. I just very briefly mentioned that I do work for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we work to help people understand the connections between all forms of sexual abuse and exploitation. And by that I mean there's intersectionality between things like child sexual abuse, sexual violence against women, sex trafficking, prostitution, and pornography. And for more than 60 years, our organization has been working to address the issue, almost 60 years, our organization has been working to address particularly this issue of pornography. So, why do I want to talk about objectification? It's because I think it's at the root of this discussion that we're having, the whole reason for this conference. I think it is the thing that is sustaining this entire monster of the pornography and sexual exploitation that goes on. I think the underlying root is a phenomenon that we call objectification. So I want us to understand these roots. And ultimately what it's about is about treating people as things. The way that we can segment people into body parts. And we see it all the time, particularly it's been around for ages, but we particularly see it in advertising. And in this example, we see how a person's legs are just replaced for the legs of a table, for instance. And a woman's body is just a handbag. So to define the term, to objectify is to make or treat something that is not an object as an object, which can be used, manipulated, controlled, and known strictly by physical properties. So let me repeat. To objectify is to make or treat something that is not an object as an object, which can be used, manipulated, controlled, or known strictly by its physical properties. Now, importantly, you can't objectify an object. Objects are objects. They are things that can be used, that can be manipulated and controlled. But there's something different when we're talking about applying those kinds of ideas to people. Now, the context in which we're going to have this conversation is the context of the issue of pornography and just the broader sexual objectification we see all around us. In America, in particular, we have this phenomenon, like the transition of our society to an image-based culture. It used to be, since way back in the 1400s when we had the printing press invented, we had this radical transformation of society until we were a print-based focused world. We were focused on print media. Now we're focused on visual media. And importantly, this visual media is now dominated by a particular type of beauty ideals. So as America continues to transition from print-based to image-based culture, both women and men are being conditioned to prioritize and idealize hegemonic, kind of like overarching archetypes of physical beauty. And moreover, we have an extreme problem with pornography use. Now, these are some stats from one pornography site. There's a major porno aggregator which thinks it's cute to put out a report annually about the annual amount of use and traffic that is happening on just this one website. And so on their website, in 2016, they reported that people watched 4.5 billion hours of porn on just their tube site. Their 2018 report said that the daily average on a daily basis, the daily average for visits to their site were 92 million, and that they had over close to 25 billion searches in 1 year. I mean, these numbers really are hard to comprehend. They're so huge that on one particular site, billions of searches are happening in any given year. Additionally, again for 2018, that they had, this one I think is really staggering, close to, well, it says 4.79 million new video uploads in 1 year. That's new pornography made in 1 year. And if you looped it, if you played it continually, end to end, it would take 115 years to watch. 115 years worth of pornography produced in 1 year. So we have this massive consumption of pornography that's happening. We also have this, of course, it's going to impact popular culture. And I think one of the people who really personifies the pornification of popular culture is Kim Kardashian. And I bring her up not to vilify her, but to me she's a product of our times. She's somebody that I actually feel sad for because I think her own family, her mother, I think, has played a significant role in her becoming this major sexual icon of our time. Now, the reason that Kim Kardashian, that her trajectory started was the fact that her boyfriend released a sex tape. It somehow got out. She had a sex tape with her then boyfriend, RJ. And this sex tape gets into the hands of Vivid, a pornography company. She sued Vivid to try to get control of it, but ended up settling in court in 2007, and was paid something like $5 million for this tape. Now, interestingly, RJ, who's a pop singer, does music, released a song which is basically talking about the very type of scenario which unfolded with Kim Kardashian. The name of the song is called Sexy Can I? And it's explicit, but part of the point of the song is about taking pictures of the girl that he's attracted to, that he's interested in, of taking her pictures, taking these sexy pictures of this girl. And how ironic that This is the very type of thing that, he has an entire video with Kim Kardashian, and this gets into the general public's hands. Now, this is a woman who's gone on to become incredibly famous and incredibly influential in social media and pop culture. She has close to 60 million followers on Twitter. It might be 60 million by now. She was one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2015. And she's even been, reported that she gets fan mail from little girls, and little girls begging her to adopt them, and that people who tell her that you're the role model for my daughter. Now, this is a woman who's incredibly sexualized. Okay, she's been in pornography. She's sex tape famous. Her whole business empire is built on the fact that she's a sex icon. And this is what young girls are aspiring, a role model for them. So in this context, I think it's a very short step for our young people to go from consuming porn to actually producing porn. Right? We have billions of hours of porn being, lots of clicks and millions of people clicking on pornography. Just on one website, we've got young people watching, consuming incredible amounts of pornography. Of course, they're going to start self-producing pornography. And we see this in issues like sexting and the various scandals that have popped up in schools across the country. So for instance, in this school in Colorado, students at the school described a system where these kids were caught collecting nude pictures of each other. But there was actually a competitive point system for this, so that the certain students who were deemed to be like high value targets, if you could get a nude image of this individual, then that increased the value you had. It was sort of like collecting baseball cards. Some baseball players where the card has had more value than other players. So this was the same idea, only with the nude pictures of their classmates. So they had a competitive point system that classmates used to accrue photographs, and different point values were assigned to different students. Students who collected naked photographs gain points by adding those desirable children to their collection. And in the end, one of the students described one of the boys who had the best collection as the pimp of pictures. So this is what's going on in classrooms across the country. So what to do with all this? Where does this leave us? Well, I think the more we can think about what it means to be a person, and the more we can interject into society ideals about what it means to be, just help people think about how these things dehumanize us. But we have to be able to, in order to tell people we're being dehumanized, we have to convince them what it is to be a person. So what is it to be a person? And as I started looking into this question, I was a little surprised, but it seems like there's not a lot of agreement between philosophers about exactly what it means to be a person. I started to read the Stanford Encyclopedia on Philosophy's definition of person, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is so over my head. But there were a few key points that I think in general there's some consensus that these are hallmarks of personhood. So things like consciousness. We have consciousness. We know that we exist. We know that we are here. We have some self-knowledge. We have the capacity to reason. Right? We can think and we can puzzle things out. So this is one of the hallmarks of personhood. And we have personality. You can think of this as individuality. There's every single person is unique. There is no one completely like another, right? There's something completely unique about each of us. And a lot of this has to do with our interests, our likes, the way we express ourselves, our personality. And of course, we have feelings. Rocks don't have feelings. So this is another way that we're distinguished from things. And we have free agency. We are beings with the capacity to act and to exercise that capacity. We're able to make moral judgments, to discern between right and wrong, between the right and wrong of certain actions and behaviors. And we form social relationships, friendships, marriages, children, all these different ways, co-workers, like friends in school. Right? We have this capacity to relate to each other and form close relationships with each other. So in total, when you consider this amalgam of characteristics, we would call this a person, and we think that this is something that gives people dignity, that it elevates us from chairs, from tables. We're special beings. And I know for a lot of us, this is part of spiritual belief, but beyond spirituality, we have the UN Declaration of Human Rights, this consensus that was formed by the nations of the world, that there's something special about humanity. And so the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So there's something incredibly important about our humanity and the dignity that we all have and preserving that. And it's been codified in the UN Declaration on Human Rights. All right, so now we've looked a little bit at what it means to be a person, let's talk about objectification theory. And this is the way that we talk about the contrast personhood with thinghood. So some of the characteristics of objects, they're inanimate usually, they're non-autonomous, they're inert, they're passive, they have a fungibility oftentimes, and frequently we use them as tools. So here's some different examples of objects, things that we use, or things that just that are not people. They're just they don't have all those capacities we just talked about before. We think about a plastic fork. Nothing particularly special about plastic forks. They're things that we dispose of readily, and one plastic fork is just as good as the other plastic fork. We have things like hammers, important tools. We do a lot with them, but nobody's going to shed a tear probably over losing a hammer. But then there are other things like works of art, which do have more value. We ascribe more value to them. So things like the Hall of Maidens here in this structure that's in Greece. But fundamentally, objectification means that we're treating one thing as another. We're treating as an object what is in fact human. And we're reducing a person to that of an instrument. It's the loss of absolute value to only a relative or instrumental value. This is what objectification does. Now, there's a woman named, gosh, I can't even read it now. I have this little tiny screen I'm trying to read. Martha Nussbaum, she did it's a paper, it's a kind of a philosophical paper, where she breaks down the ways that we objectify, some of the hallmarks of objectification. What is it that ways and behaviors that are specific to objectification? And I don't recommend that you read the paper. I mean, by all means, if you wish to, but I will just say that there is some explicit material that she's analyzing in this paper. But her breakdown is fascinating. So she talks about objectification. One of she identifies these 7 ways we objectify people. One of them is through instrumentality. In other words, that we treat others as tools for one's own purpose. Now, keep these in your mind, because later we're going to see if this applies to pornography. So keep these in your mind. Does something like this apply to porn? Treating others as a tool for one's own purpose. Denial of autonomy. So treating of another person as lacking self-determination. Inertness, treatment of another person as lacking agency and activity. Fungibility, treatment of another person as interchangeable with others. Is one just as good as the other? Is there any, they're not special. They're just a thing, just interchangeable. Are they something that's valuable? In other words, can you break it? Is it permissible to break it? Is it something that we can own? And when we're talking about people, it's literally treating another person as something that is owned. And denial of subjectivity. Actually, subjectivity is another major philosophical issue. I didn't know. I've learned a lot in starting to research this area. There's been a lot of philosophical discussion about subjectivity. But basically here we're talking about the treatment of another person as somebody whose feelings and experiences do not need to be considered. Now, and then we get to sexual objectification. And here, not only are they a person objectified, but the perception of the person is only in light of their usefulness for sex. Now, sexual objectification is something that's been going on for probably millennia. It's not new to our world, and it's certainly not new to advertising. And this is certainly one of the main ways that we see it in our world today. Beer ads. I mean, some of the most mundane things in the world have been marketed through sexual objectification. Now, I can't show you explicit material, but I've got ads that, toilet paper, for crying out loud. Really, there's nothing that people won't try to sexualize in terms of thinking that this is somehow going to make their product more appealing to the public by sexualizing the product and objectifying the people who are portraying in the purpose in that ad in order to sell that product. Again, I can't show you this image, but this is one of the most amazing examples because it so makes the point. PETA, which is an organization that's ostensibly about protecting its people for the ethical treatment of animals, and they had a big campaign where they were encouraging people to go vegan, right? To basically, not eat meat, and they used the model Pamela Anderson as a pinup girl for their campaign. But in portraying her, they had butcher marks all over her body and the various parts of her body labeled as if she were going to be cut up as a piece of meat. Pamela Anderson, portrayed with butcher marks and labeled like pieces, her body labeled like pieces of meat, and you can see here her feet. And the tagline of the ad campaign, all animals have the same parts. Now, traditionally we think about sexual objectification as something that's mostly, we all know how women are very much sexually objectified, but increasingly we're seeing it happening to men. Again, I can't show you the ad, but this is a guy in a topless, he's not wearing a shirt, in a kitchen. But the whole point is to sell salad dressing. I mean, so there's really no limits to what advertisers will not objectify, try to sexualize, but in so doing, objectify a person. And ultimately, what I would like to argue is that this results in fragmentation. Okay, so we have this person that's full of these characteristics that we talked about earlier, autonomy and emotions and personality and the ability to make moral judgments and all that, but now we're fragmenting that individual into bits. And I think this is important because ultimately it impacts our capacity to have empathy towards people, to recognize them as a fully human person. So empathy for another's happiness and suffering depends fundamentally on recognizing that the other has a mind, that it has the same capacities for thought, emotion, desire, intention, and self-awareness as ourselves. Without appreciating others' minds, empathy makes no sense. Simply put, we treat others according to the perceived qualities and capacities of their minds. Now, chairs, tables, they don't have minds. You get these people put up in these ways. Are we concerned about their minds, their feelings, what kind of day they had? What's their favorite color? We're depersonalizing these people when we portray them in these kinds of ways. So objectification creates a failure of empathy, and also I believe it fuels sexual narcissism. So what do I mean by sexual narcissism? I mean a sexuality which is completely self-centered, which doesn't have concern for the welfare of the other, which doesn't even recognize them as a person. They're just a tool I use for my sexual gratification. And I think our society, that we are in a completely sexually narcissistic society. That's why we have all these people using pornography. When you're using pornography, you don't have to be concerned about the welfare of the other person, the person who's being portrayed in the pornography. You don't know the first thing about that person. So there certainly can't be mutuality. There's no mutuality of pleasure involved because you're not actually connecting with that person in a real way. And there's certainly no affection. You don't even know this person. So we're taking human sexuality and stripping away all the elements of human sexuality which give it meaning. And we're just focusing on our own pleasure. So sexual narcissism. Now, let's go a little bit into some of the research, and this is where it gets quite fascinating. So there's a lot of studies that look at objectification and the impacts that it has. So there was a study, this particular study, said that sexualized females failed to elicit spontaneous mental state attribution. Okay, so basically what they're saying is they took pictures of people who were either sexualized or not sexualized, and they showed them to a group of men, and the men were more likely to not attribute mental capacities to women who were sexualized. Okay? So, let me go back to read this whole thing for you. Sexualized females failed to elicit spontaneous mental state attribution to the same extent as others, like clothed females or sexualized males or even unclothed males, and individuals who harbor hostile sexist attitudes. Now, when they talk about these mental attributes, what they're talking about is inferring the existence of the other person's mental states, like that they have intentions, that they have beliefs, that they have desires. So you don't think about that when you sexualize a person. That goes out the window. And sexualized female faces were not better remembered than controls. Participants were better at recognizing sexualized headless female bodies as compared to the other types of bodies. So the male who saw these images were better at recognizing headless sexualized bodies than even sexualized bodies with faces. Sexualized images of women's bodies activate the same neural networks associated with manipulable objects. Greater association in this network predicted better memory for sexualized women's bodies. So what these researchers are saying is that these women are looked at as tools. They're looked at as things that you use. Now, let's take it down another level and look at self-objectification. So self-objectification is where a person adopts a third-person perspective of their own body. And oftentimes it becomes this chronic attention to one's own physical appearance and valuing their appearance over their competence in other areas. So their appearance becomes the most important thing about them. And again, there's been a good amount of research in this area. So this was a meta-analysis. I'm going to share with you a meta-analysis. So this means that they're looking at a wide range of studies. In this case, 54 studies. And this meta-analysis looked at studies that explored the extent and under which conditions sexualizing media fostered self-objectification among individuals. And their analysis showed a positive and significant association between sexualizing media use across various types of media and self-objectification among women and men. So it affected women and men. So if you consume sexualizing media, what they're saying is you're more likely to engage in self-objectification. Use of video games with highly sexualized images of female main characters and or online media led to stronger self-objectification effects when compared to television use. So these are the ways these are the media that people are using these days, right? They're engaging with video games, they're online, using social media, and those forms of, I don't know if you want to call it entertainment or whatever, that was more likely to produce a self-objectifying effect. Now, self-objectification has been associated with such symptoms as eating disorders, lower task performance outcomes, and higher rates of smoking and depressive symptoms. It's also resulted in lower task performance. In this study, they had people dress either wearing a sweater or wearing a swimsuit. So they equated wearing a swimsuit with being in a state of self-objectification. Across all races and both genders, if you were in a state of self-objectification, you did much worse on task performance, on taking a test. And here's a particularly sad one. And this was from a few years ago, but there was a survey done of 4,000 adults, but of the males, what they found was that they were very interested in beefing up. It's kind of contrary to a lot of the females who are always trying to get slimmer, right, typically. But in the case of males, they were feeling pressure to beef up. And 11% of those surveyed said they would sacrifice more than 5 years of their lives in order to achieve their body ideals. Now, can you imagine 5 years of life just so that your body could be perfect, your perfected body for a short period of time? We're running short on time, but there are some other interesting studies. This one was about girls' clothing, looking at sexualizing girls' clothing, and they found that stores, like close to 30% of the clothing for little girls had sexualizing characteristics. Another study, girls just giving the choice between two different kinds of paper dolls. Well, many of them would rather choose the sexy doll, a sexy paper doll, and that would be their ideal of being themselves, if they could be like the sexy doll. And other studies have looked at and found that when girls, 5th grade girls, were dressed in sexualizing clothing, that she was seen as less intelligent, less competent, and less moral than when she was dressed in childlike clothing. So we see the impact on the dehumanization happening when girls are sexualized, right? They're not being seen as intelligent, as competent, and they're seen as less moral. And in other research, they actually, in this particular study, they said, in conclusion, the current research demonstrates a causal link between objectification and depersonalization. Objectification leads to people being viewed as lacking mental states, so attribution of mind, and being less deserving of moral status. You're less deserving of moral status when you're perceived as an object. It impacts aggression. So in order to meet our time deadline, I'm going to go a little quicker here. I do want to mention Catherine McKinnon. So now we're going to wrap around to the issue of pornography. Now, Catherine McKinnon is a very famous, a really internationally famous individual who's done a tremendous amount of work on themes of objectification. And she says, a sex object is defined on the basis of looks, in terms of its usability for sexual pleasure. A person, in one Kantian view, is a free and rational agent whose existence is an end of itself, as opposed to an instrument. But in pornography, women exist to the end of male pleasure. Okay, so now we've kind of come back full circle to the issue of pornography. So the point here is that by the objectification that's been taking place, the human person no longer is an end of themselves, but the woman portrayed in pornography, right, she's just an end of male pleasure. She is a tool. So, what to do with all this? Well, of course, for anybody who is maybe currently involved in using pornography and having that struggle, I think there's definitely questions to ask. Are you struggling with pornography use, and do you entertain sexual thoughts and fantasies about strangers? Are you consuming pornography that you don't like? Do you find yourself having sexual fantasies that include abuse or violence towards others? Or has pornography made you a more selfish sexual partner? If pornography has been part of your experience, I think these are valuable questions of self-reflection that to ask. And then kind of echoing on what Mr. Cox was saying earlier, empathy is really a major part of this. It's a way of countering the dehumanization, the thingifying that happens through pornography. So how do we build empathy? Well, it's something we have to all practice at, but it's definitely having an others-centric point of view and towards how we relate to other people, that we're really honing in on being sensitive to the feelings, the thoughts of other people. So we're making a habit of expressing our appreciation to people. We're asking people how they feel. We're becoming aware of the impact that we have on other people. Maybe we do a project to support people who are struggling in some situation, and we ask people, we reflecting thoughts, and reflect thoughts, their feelings back right? That's how you feel like you've been heard, right? When you can reflect back what somebody's been telling you. So these are just some small ways maybe towards help building empathy in ourselves towards others. I also would argue that we need to really confront the public health crisis of pornography. And this is one of the things that we're working on so hard at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. You may have heard in the previous session, the opening session, where Mr. Cox brought up the public health resolution that was passed in the state of Utah declaring pornography a public health crisis. That resolution was actually authored by the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, where I work, and now it's been passed in 15 states, and we're working with local folks across the country who are interested in getting it passed in their states as well. But that's the stepping stone. By passing that resolution, it's a stepping stone to allow us to then, okay, well, now we've declared it a public health crisis. This means we have to do something about it. So let's start looking at the different ways in our states that we can take action to address the harms that pornography use is having on our culture. And then I think we also need to work, so that's kind of the public health approach is the macro approach, right? That's looking at it from the really big picture, but we also have to look at it within a smaller context, within the family units, with our own individual relationships with each other. So how do we shift perceptions about objectification? Well, we can monitoring internet use, particularly parents of children, is a really big part of this, because we've already seen how by being through video games or engaging in social media, that young people are going to be more likely to self-objectify. So monitoring, and I would say limiting the amount of time that they're spending online. And then you want to teach your youth to actually monitor their own use. Okay, it's not enough that you be the cop, but you want to teach them to have enough self-awareness that they too know that they need to limit their time online. We need to look on our own, there's research that actually says that maternal parenting styles have an impact. Maternal parenting can help, and especially pertaining to young people. When we have parenting styles that are less materialistic and mothers who are more religious. This is research. And there's also research that shows that females who participate in athletics also are more likely to have stronger resilience to the sexual objectification and those forces that are going on in our culture. And I also want to suggest that we have ongoing conversations with young people about self-worth and self-respect and respect for others. And I think it's important that we also have parental role modeling. And by this I mean, if your mother's dressing a little, in its objectified, pornified way, then we can expect the child to probably do so as well. So what are we modeling to children? And then identification of role models. And I think this is really critically important, because people like Kim Kardashian become a super peer. There's actually a term called super peers, where they exist in the popular culture, and these are the icons, the people that young adolescent girls are aspiring to be like. Now, I would put forth that Kim Kardashian is not an ideal role model for young girls, but what are we going to substitute it with? Right? Who do we find? Who can you suggest? Like whether it's in your immediate network or even people, who are some female icons that you could talk to your young person about considering them as a role model, as opposed to a sexualized person, right? And there are actually programs like the Body Image Resilience Program that you could go through yourself and with the young people in your lives. They have great blogs, and they have actually curriculum and so forth that will really help young people who are struggling with these issues. So these are just some beginning ideas. There's no silver bullets here. I'm just throwing some ideas out, and I really, if you have other thoughts or know of other resources, I really welcome the opportunity to hear about those. But that, my friends, is all I had to share. This just exploration of objectification, the impact that it has on our lives, and how it's really core to, this is to me the bedrock on which the pornography industry is built on. The principal problem with pornography is the way that it objectifies and dehumanizes people. And I think the way we can counter its messages is by, as much as possible, when we're interacting with others, to talk about its impact on human dignity. All right, well, thank you. I don't know if anybody has any questions. We actually were over time, but I'll stay. Okay.